Thank you very much, Aria. Here's a little chair.
Hello.
For my son, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting us here today to take on a subject that obviously we think about occasionally but don't really explore. The word home. It's a small word, but it's a big subject and quite a deep one. And inevitably when one sort of tackles it head on, as we've heard a little earlier from others, you tend to be identified by the documents that you have sort of be associated with, like your passport. In my case, it's from Ireland. But you also see on that passport it says European Union. And both those words are in a few different languages in that one document. And this idea of home also is slightly more complicated for somebody like myself who's coming to their 6th time of taking on their Dubai residency visa, now 15 years in the UAE. You take on the awareness, as the word has been already mentioned, expatriate. It's not a word I have to say I'm very comfortable with. Sort of all of these documents and the word itself sort of leads one to sort of take the word that home is somewhere else, somewhere other than where you are. And if you look at the definition of expatriate, it indicates, as you Google it on Wikipedia, that expatriate is a person temporarily or permanently residing in a country and culture other than that of the person's upbringing. The word comes from the Latin term ex, out of, patria, country, fatherland. And just take note, other than that of the person's upbringing. The Latin phrase reminds me of my Latin teacher in boarding school. He used to take every opportunity to whack us over the knuckles if we didn't conjugate our Latin verbs right, which I'm sure is not an issue here at Dubai College. Not because the teachers might like to occasionally whack you over the knuckles, but maybe Latin isn't your subject. But a bit like Ali, that's a tangent. We'll go back to the story we're talking about. Expatria, the idea of being out of your country, out of fatherland, is out of where you were having your upbringing is the definition as it says. And in that sense, that doesn't really work for me. It doesn't work for us because I was born and raised in, Cyprus to Irish parents and raised in the Middle East. And in that sense, expatriate doesn't work for me because I'm not outside the country of my upbringing. I'm actually well inside it in the sense of being brought up in the Middle East. The clicker, right there we go. Out of country. There's my Cypriot birth certificate. And in that sense, it started for me and Frankie to sit down, and I was thinking to myself, what does home mean for me? And then I was being compounded even further to think that for my son, he would think of home as somewhere other than what we have together. That would be really sort of disappointing if that was the case, and quite saddening, really. So home for us has to be somewhere where we are together. And we sat down and we started to, I asked Frankie to script on the whiteboard what he would identify as the subjects that he puts together as home. And you can see he came up with a list on the left: family, special, fun, and precious, and a number of other things. But we started to realize through our exploration that actually home wasn't a place, wasn't a country per se, but was actually a set of values. A set of values that has been built up in our home and in our family over a very long period of time. And I'm going to invite Frankie now to tell us his history of how our family built their set of values to make their home.
Good evening. My name is Francis Anthony Evers, and I am very proud to be the 7th generation of my family to hold this name. I was born in Dubai in 2002 to parents of Irish and Arab origin. Migration has been a big feature of my family tree for many generations, going back at least 100 years to my great-grandparents, born around the turn of 19th and 20th century. I actually share the same name and birth date as my great-grandfather, the 22nd of September 1902, exactly 100 years apart. He was born in Dublin, Ireland, and he became a policeman after fighting the Ireland's War of Independence in 1921. Migrating to different towns involved many postings. In Ireland, at one such posting, he met my great-grandmother, Hannah Rayner. Something oriental about that Irish-sounding name. My other paternal great-grandmother, Margaret Ronan, was born in the west of Ireland, and she immigrated to America after World War I, where she worked in New York as a hotel housekeeper. There she met my great-grandfather, Tom Doyle. But unlike most Irish immigrants, they returned to Ireland as Tom Doyle could never adapt to America. My nanny told me that America's a great place to live. He said, America's a great place to live, but you wouldn't want to die there. Meanwhile, around the same time on the far side of the world, my maternal great-grandfather, Saeed Zabag, and his young wife, Nazli Sayed, who were both born and raised in Lebanon, migrated to Jaffa for the opportunity, in Palestine, for the opportunity to work as a math teacher, where they spent many enjoyable years before fleeing back to Lebanon with their young family in 1948. I hope you can see my great-grandfather who's in the glasses, and that's them fleeing back to Lebanon because of the new Israeli state. A little further to the east, my Iraqi great-grandfather, Muhammad Ali Faris, set off from Baghdad to neighboring Syria on his postings as a young diplomat, where he met my great-grandmother, Sabiha Akash, who herself was the daughter of Circassian refugees who had settled in Damascus after fleeing Central Europe in mid-19th century. There's my great-grandmother, and that's me and my sister sitting next to her. And that's my great-grandmother, and that's her husband, and that's my grandmother, and that's her brother. In these four separate worlds of migration, the values that now define our home were born.
Thank you, Frankie. I had an incredible history of migration for over 100 years, probably even longer. So the idea of home or an expatriate of a place of your upbringing doesn't sit. What sits is a set of values in which you sort of congregate around, that you identify with. And for our sake, for our family and for the sense of our identity, we sort of lock into the likes of human dignity, liberty, equality, education, and the rule of law. These are big values, and they also can be brought down to being very granular, intimate values. And they also happen to be the founding values of the European Union, in which we are, as I go back to the first image, citizens of the European Union. And these are values that have been emulated and spread across the world. You may or may not be aware that I won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. Actually, we won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. In a sense, actually, so did Ali Mustafa and everybody else in this room who happens to be citizens of the European Union, because it was the values, the European Union was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize this year, principally based on its founding values, to remind the world, to remind Europe at this very, very difficult time, that these values are something to celebrate, and also, most importantly, something to protect, because they're under duress at the moment with the great economic crisis in Europe, as countries are tempted to retrench to their own self-interest in the same way that an individual might. Countries are tempted to do that, but this is a time in which countries have to go into further integration, where home has to become a set of values that are shared in a wider space, because you cannot have these values in isolation. They can't be an island. And the idea that you would look to retrench, I think we have to look to spread out further. Because the problems the world faces today are not, they don't recognize borders, they don't recognize checkpoints. Who would have thought you could go scuba diving in the subways of Manhattan? Climate change is an issue in which needs global solutions, needs global families, and the idea that individual nation states would retrench into their own space for their own solution in the same way that a family might think, or an individual think, it's not possible. We have to move into a post-nation state idea. nationalism, from my perception, is a curse of the 20th century. We have to move into a state of post-nation state, one in which we are fortunate to already be. We are living, most of the people in this room are already citizens of the post-nation state era. We're not burdened with the sort of emotional drama and disorientation that a lot of people may have back in the so-called fatherlands. So we are already out front and can be gateways, if you like, vehicles in which to help families and others to come across to this new idea of being post-nation state. We have the luxury of having an e-gate card, if you like, that allows us to ramble in and out and be in that separate space. Frankie?
Both sets of my grandparents hold these values deeply and indeed promoted and benefited from them as the European Union embraced all four of them when migration came knocking on their doors. My Jadot, Mohammed Tabar, born in Palestine and raised in Lebanon, and my Teta, Maha Faris, born in Baghdad with her Circassian green eyes to Iraqi and Syrian parents, and raised in Beirut, were welcomed in the UK in the 1970s as they sought a safe haven from the Lebanese Civil War. And that's them on their 25th anniversary. As fate would have it, a few years earlier, my New York-born Irish grandmother, Theresa Doyle, and her Irish husband, my granddad, Frankie V, migrated to the Middle East to work with the United Nations to assist with peace agreements between rival nations. And this is, that's him in Yemen, and I think there's a picture of their marriage certificate. It is no surprise, perhaps, that my Bahrain-born British mum, sitting in the audience, Jara Sabag, and my Cyprus-born Irish dad, Sean, became journalists, international correspondents, and met while on assignments in South Africa. And now my sister Maha and my brother Kamal inherit these 100-year-old values: respect for law, human dignity, liberty, equality, education, and rule of law. We conclude with a new definition for Wikipedia to consider: an expatriate child,
of an expatriate father, parent,
of an expatriate grandparent,
of an expatriate great-grandparent, should be the definition of a new global citizen, of which we are both proud to be. Thank you very much.